When I was a young girl growing up in Mumbai, one of my jobs before going to school was to collect donations of eggs and milk from some of our neighbors. My mother was the founder and director of a large health and community development organization that dealt with leprosy control and tuberculosis treatment. Mom knew that nutrition was essential for a successful recovery from TB. But as she did not have the funding to provide this, she would solicit donations from her friends and neighbors who were also not that well off, but could afford to donate an egg here or a bottle of milk over there. Being a very disorganized child, my mornings were invariably very chaotic, trying to get breakfast and get dressed and then run around collecting the donations. I had unwittingly become part of my mom's ripple, helping her aid TB patients in their recovery. The larger impact of these actions completely eluded me. One ripple seemed like, well, one ripple. Poverty was such a huge issue, too large for my mother or an 8-year-old schoolgirl to tackle, no matter how many eggs I collected. Or so it seemed. In contrast, my father came at this issue of individual action in a different way. He would tell us stories of Gandhi's simple actions that mobilized the Indian nation and eventually led to India's freedom from the British. But even that was not convincing. After all, Gandhi was a larger-than-life hero, a revered leader. It was difficult for me to imagine following in his footsteps. So I still did not see how small steps could change the world, especially not my small steps. But the seeds that had been planted in my head as a child grew unknowingly. Those early actions formed the creative framework for my life and art. And even here, now, and in the future, those lessons of collecting eggs and milk to help the underprivileged still flow out into the world. I came to Chicago to study at the School of the Art Institute, and I met my husband there. And after much back and forth, we ended up settling in Evanston. But I still visited my parents in Mumbai, usually every January. And at that time, the government of India carried on its week-long leprosy health education initiative. It was a countrywide initiative. And I saw the posters that my mom's organization created. The doctors and the paramedical workers would help in doing this. And they talked about the curability of leprosy, but with so much detail that they were pretty much not read by many people and so were virtually ineffective. It seemed logical to me that the best way to convince people that leprosy was curable was to talk to people who had actually been cured. And so we worked with a group of children from a small village outside of Mumbai that had a very high incidence of leprosy. The children started out expressing their feelings and ideas about the world around them, and then moved on to the subject of leprosy and how it had impacted their lives. Their words and drawings were then painted on a commuter train that went from the far suburbs to downtown Mumbai. The children's responses were powerful in their simplicity and straightforwardness. My favorite is from a child who said, "I took my pills and I was cured." And that was exactly the message that we wanted to convey. The train was called Our Own Vision and was seen by thousands of people. And a record number of them went into the examination booths that were set up at various railway stations. As a result, many people were identified with early stages of leprosy and were able to start their treatment. I was amazed by the impact of the Our Own Vision train and how public art could engage people where they were and motivate them to take their own individual action. The success of this first public art project motivated me to expand my thinking from family to community and then to a larger worldview. I knew nothing about public art, but felt that the combination of art and activism that had been such an integral part of my upbringing was a perfect fit for a public art and community work practice. Besides, I love the fact that art could retain its aesthetic value and still be used in this very practical and purposeful way. In addition, I saw public art as a way to restore art's earlier role as an essential part of everyday life, a way to express oneself and to share one's view of the world. Today, there are Chicago residents who have never had the opportunity to visit an art museum. And for many, art has no relevance in their lives. I wanted to change that. I wanted to make art relevant and attract and engage people in the power of possibility, their possibility to make change happen where and as they lived. The issue that was foremost for me has always been peace and nonviolence. Many people think of nonviolence as simply not being violent. But nonviolence as practiced by Gandhi and King is actually much more. It is a creative force that colors and influences all of one's actions. It is a way of life that takes individual action for granted. I was thus saddened by the constant news about violent actions in one form or another, from the horrendous mass shootings to aggressive behavior between neighbors, in schoolyards, and even in cyberspace. I felt the need to take a stand because inaction has its consequences. It allows negative, harmful actions taken by other people, other ripples, to gain momentum, spread, and then impact us in numerous ways. Remembering the example that was set by my mother, I wondered if a public art project could become a catalyst for change and spark a dialogue about peace and nonviolence. I believe that art in the public space has the capacity to do something that even art museums cannot do. It can attract the attention and imagination of everyone who walks through that space. It can compel us to be aware of our neighborhood environment and question and think. And it can act as a neighborhood landmark, establishing a shared sense of ownership. So knowing this, I wondered whether it could also motivate people to play an active role in shaping the social fabric of their community. And so with that in mind, I created the Emerging Buddha sculpture as a reminder that peace is still possible, no matter the violence that intrudes into our lives at different levels. This was the beginning of the 10,000 Ripples Public Art, Peace, and Civic Engagement Initiative. This is the largest public art project that I have undertaken, and it was from the very beginning rooted in collaboration. We started by inviting a wide range of stakeholders from arts and community organizations to form an advisory council to help shape the project. We partnered with Changing Worlds, the lead arts organization, and host organizations in each of the 10 participating communities. The entire first year was spent in planning, conversation, and dialogue in the different communities. After all, the image of the emerging Buddha is surprising and it can be provocative when seen on city streets. Communities had to want the 10,000 ripple sculptures in their neighborhoods. On account of these year-long conversations, the emerging Buddha became less of an artwork installed in public space and more of a catalyst for dialogue and interaction. 10,000 ripples followed the call and response tradition that is common in so many cultures. The Buddha sculptures were the call to engage neighborhoods across the city in a joint expression of public voice. The responses were enormous and reflected the diversity of the different communities. For example, at one neighborhood meeting in Pilsen, which is a largely Mexican Catholic community, issues of culture, ethnicity, and faith arose, as the image of the Buddha was alien to many of the residents there. However, in the ensuing discussion, which happened to be very lively, some of the residents said that, yes, while this was a Mexican Catholic community, Pilsen was still part of a larger world community, and its residents would benefit from exposure to symbols and ideas from other cultures. In addition, they agreed with our view that the Buddha was just one of many peace symbols from various cultures. So the importance of dialogue as a way to exchange ideas and deepen one's understanding of different points of view was also very important. This was the case with in a panel discussion that we had in Uptown at a Buddhist temple, where Buddhist, Muslim, and Native American leaders, artists, and the general community came together to discuss cultural appropriation and the various aspects of it. By giving up control of the placement of the sculptures and allowing communities to interpret the work in their own way, the emerging Buddhas developed a presence of their own. And they were transformed by the environmental forces inherent to each site, whether it was an abandoned lot or a school entrance, a community garden, or in front of the alderman's office. Just by being present, they invited a re-examination of meanings and associations and encouraged new viewpoints. One idea, one ripple started this project. It has generated thousands of ripples from participants who have joined their ripples to ours and who have then shaped the landscape of their communities. It created new artistic programming for thousands of residents. Teachers used the emerging Buddhas to teach about nonviolence and peace in their classrooms. A child at Hedges School, whose mother had been very tragically shot in front of him, had not spoken for a whole year. His response to the sculpture was unique. He felt that because the Buddhas did not have a mouth, he needed to be the voice of the sculpture and talk about peace and nonviolence. In Uptown, offerings of rice were placed around the sculpture. In South Chicago, peace activist Gregory Bretan carried the Buddha on the back of his truck and used it as a focal point for all of his community events. The 100th Buddha was installed at the Iglesia de Dios Church in Little Village. Pastor Ramiro Rodriguez placed the sculpture near the entrance to the church as a reminder to his parishioners to work for peace. A young woman, Helen Lee, created her own ripples. She conducted beach yoga at the Loyola Dunes sculpture every Sunday morning for 2 years and donated the money to the project. I was surprised at the way the sculptures were received. And across Chicago, they were welcomed, hugged, interacted with, ignored, debated, occasionally graffitied, and protected. Ultimately, they provoked questions, introspection, and conversation at a neighborhood level, and invited communities to move from reflection to action. Thus, I believe that the question we need to ask ourselves is not whether or not I can make a difference in the world, but rather, what kind of difference will I make? After all, each small ripple reverberates outwards through space and time, inspiring and mingling with others along the way. That one ripple leads to 10,000 and keeps growing. And it can eventually become a tidal wave that is powerful enough to change the world. Thank you.